On March 3, 1944, a massive 500-ton freight train crossed into the darkness of a mountain tunnel and never came out. There was no collision, no track derailment, no explosion to alert the outside. This was Train 8017, laboring against the steep, unforgiving inclines of the Apennine Mountains in southern Italy. Officially, this was a working freight line meant to carry cargo and a small skeleton crew. But hidden inside those wooden cars were over 600 people. Wartime desperation had constructed a slow, invisible trap, turning a routine transport into record-breaking tragedy. By late 1944, Italy was fractured by World War II. The nation was split, its infrastructure was heavily bombed, and regular passenger travel was virtually non-existent. Severe food shortages pushed civilians to the brink of starvation. To survive, people resorted to train hopping on the active military and freight lines, desperate to reach the countryside where they could trade for food to bring back to their families. This shadow transportation network became known as the Black Market Express. Railway officials knew civilians were cramming onto cargo trains, but they largely turned a blind eye to keep the peace. When Train 8017 left Naples on March 2nd, over 700 undocumented men, women, and children were hidden inside its 47 cargo wagons. In their rush to escape the famine waiting at home, they had willingly boarded a machine that was operating dangerously far beyond its physical limits. The route to Potenza required the train to stop at Battipaglia. Here, the crew swapped out their electric engines for steam power to tackle the steep, non-electrified mountain passes ahead. This diagram illustrates a fatal mechanical compromise. Instead of placing one locomotive at the front and one at the rear to help push, crews attached both steam engines to the very front of the 500-ton load. Pulling that immense weight up a 1.3% incline dragged the train heavily backward, causing the lead wheels to spin uselessly against the rails. Then came a second compromise. Wartime resource rationing forced engineers to burn whatever fuel they could find, specifically low-grade coal, a rocky, impure alternative that produced significantly less power. Burning this specific low-quality coal generated exceptionally high concentrations of carbon monoxide, an invisible, odorless, and highly poisonous gas. Loaded down and underpowered, Train 8017 left Balvano Station just after midnight, struggling to reach a top speed of only 15 kilometers per hour. Poor physics and toxic chemistry meant the train was mechanically incapable of conquering the mountain before it even entered the tunnel. At 12:50 a.m., the locomotives entered the poorly ventilated Galleria delle Armi tunnel. The air inside was already choked with thick smoke from another train that had just passed through. Inside the dark passage, the humidity coated the tracks in a slick layer of moisture. The locomotives lost their remaining traction. The iron wheels began violently spinning and sparking against the wet steel, until the 500-ton mass ground to a halt deep inside the mountain. The drivers reacted exactly as they were trained to. They threw the throttles open to restart the engines, unknowingly pumping massive, concentrated volumes of lethal carbon monoxide directly into the unventilated tunnel. Realizing they couldn't move forward, the front drivers tried to throw the train into reverse to coast downhill to safety, but the rear brakemen, isolated in the back wagons and feeling the train slip backwards, assumed they were sliding out of control and slammed on the emergency brakes. The train was completely deadlocked. With the engines still burning, the narrow space rapidly filled with gas. The working crew up front lost consciousness first. Behind them, the hundreds of passengers lying in the wooden wagons simply drifted into a deeper sleep, quietly asphyxiating in the dark. The rear brakeman's standard safety protocol became the exact mechanism that locked 600 people inside a gas chamber. It took hours for anyone to realize what had happened. It wasn't until 5:10 a.m. that a surviving brakeman from the rear cars managed to stumble out of the tunnel and reach the nearest station to beg for help. A rescue crew was immediately dispatched, but they hit a horrifying obstacle. They couldn't move their equipment close to the trapped wagons because the gravel tracks leading into the darkness were littered with the bodies of passengers who had woken up, tried to flee on foot, and collapsed in the fumes. The survival rate was bleak. Out of the hundreds of civilians packed into the train, only about 40 people, those lucky enough to be in the very last wagons near the tunnel entrance, were pulled out alive. The dead were eventually hauled back to the Balvano station and laid out in rows. Families walked quietly among them, searching for familiar faces. But over 300 victims carried no identification. They were gathered up and buried unceremoniously in 4 mass graves nearby. Then the political erasure began. With the war raging on, Allied forces strictly censored the event to prevent a drop in public morale. The Italian authorities, desperate to avoid liability, quickly distanced themselves from the entire catastrophe. No one was held accountable. Instead, with a cold administrative efficiency, the bodies were cleared, the wreckage was moved, and the railway line was officially reopened the very next day. Italy's deadliest railway tragedy remains a quiet testament to wartime neglect, a preventable loss of life allowed by the same authorities who ultimately buried its memory.